As President Joe Biden announces that a bipartisan commission will spend 6 months studying possible changes to the Supreme Court. What kind of changes are on the table? Adding more seats to the court and instituting term limits for justices, among other things. Joining us now to talk about his own research on the topic is Adam Chilton. He's a professor and the Walter Mander Research Scholar at the University of Chicago Law School. Professor, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
First of all, the Constitution says that the Congress can determine the number of justices, and there have not always been 9 justices. Tell us more about that.
That's correct. So the Constitution doesn't mention the number of justices on the Supreme Court. Initially, the first Congress set the number at 6 justices. And over the course of the 17 and 1800s, that number moved up and down, I think about 7 times. In 1869, the number settled in on 9 justices, and it's been that way ever since.
So 9 justices since 1869. Another, and we'll get to the prospect of increasing the size in a minute, but another option that's on the table is term limits for justices, and the most frequently mentioned potential term is an 18-year term. Is that a good idea?
Yes, I think it's a great idea in that with an 18-year term, it ensures that every president that's elected would be able to appoint 2 justices. So one in their first 2 years and one in their second 2 years. And that would have the nice effect of more closely linking the composition of the Supreme Court to electoral outcomes. Whereas now it's determined by the vagaries of when the justices die or when they strategically retire. So you have situations where Jimmy Carter was able to appoint 0 Supreme Court justices during his 4-year term, but Donald Trump, during his 3-year term, was able to appoint 3. And so right now we have a system that's really determined a lot by random luck and strategic behavior, and the term limits would help to even the appointments across presidential terms.
And you've done research on this, you ran some models and so forth. What did that research tell you? And you touched on it slightly, but what did the research tell you about what term limits of 18 years would do to the liberal-conservative breakdown on the court?
So one impact is that it would be the balance of the Supreme Court would be less likely to be extremely partisan. That is, it would be less likely that you'd have years in which there were 7 or 8 justices appointed by presidents from the same party. And the reason is that our presidential elections tend to go back and forth. So we had Biden, before that was Trump, before that Obama, Bush, et cetera, between Democrats and Republicans. And if you have term limits, it basically then ensures that the court more closely reflects those electoral outcomes. So you'd have a lot more years with 5 or 6 justices from the same party composing the majority, instead of 7 or 8 justices from the same party composing the majority.
My understanding is that term limits seem to have more support among both liberals and conservatives than adding seats to the court. Why is that?
Well, I think that having term limits is a system where it seems stable long-term and also fair. If we were to add seats now, it would create a windfall for the party that's able to add those seats. And the natural response then would be in the future, when there's a Republican president and a Republican Senate, that they would be tempted to add seats as well. And the worry would be that you just have a tit-for-tat response until the Supreme Court grew larger and larger. But with term...
No, what I was going to say is my understanding is that you and a lot of other people think that the prospect of adding seats to the court is pretty much dead in the water. Is that how you feel?
I think that's right. With the Democrats only having 51 votes in the Senate and currently the unwillingness to get rid of the filibuster, the prospect of adding more seats to the Supreme Court, I think, is completely unlikely in the current situation.
Going back to the prospect of term limits, how would that work? Could it be done by statute? Would it have to be done via constitutional amendment? What do you think?
So this is hotly debated. What the Constitution says is that the justices of the Supreme Court shall serve in a term of good behavior. Now, good behavior has been interpreted to mean that the justices can't be removed unless they commit some form of impeachable offense. And so any term limit plan that would want to get rid of the current justices or to put a hard cap on the amount of time you can be a Supreme Court justice on 18 years would require a constitutional amendment. However, a number of the plans instead call for the idea that after 18 years on the court, that the justices would still be Supreme Court justices, but they would transition to senior status where they had different responsibilities. So they might be able to participate in some internal deliberations or the management of the federal judiciary, or sit on lower court cases, but they wouldn't be deciding the merits cases in front of the Supreme Court. Now, if the term limits plan takes that approach, then it's possible it could just be done by a statute passed by Congress.
If it were done via statute, would presumably that someone would challenge the statute, and could it ultimately be decided by the Supreme Court itself?
Yes, that's right. Ultimately, whether or not the term limits was consistent with Article 3 of the Constitution, which sets out the rules for the judiciary, is a constitutional question, and that's a question that the Supreme Court would have the authority to determine. So you not only have to convince the senators and Congress people to pass a term limits plan, you'd have to convince John Roberts and the other members of the Supreme Court that it was constitutional as well. And that might be tricky, since they would be essentially signing away their right to a lifetime appointment of having a position of huge influence.
And it's unlikely that any of them would recuse themselves on an issue that was so personal. Professor Chilton, thank you so much for joining us. We very much appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.